Last week on Busted Open Radio, Bubba Ray Dudley said that MJF has the potential to be the next megastar in pro wrestling. John Cena-esque, Rock-esque were his exact words, and we talk about it next on the Squared Circle Psycho Babble. My name is Michael Valenti. Joining me is Ralph Valenti. I agree with Bubba Ray Dudley here, Ralph. Do you agree with Bubba Ray Dudley here?
So I do not agree with Bubba Ray Dudley. I think that MJF is going to go on and have a very successful and very impressive career in professional wrestling, but I don't think he is going to reach the level of stardom or that mega stardom that the likes of Hogan, Rock, Austin, even Cena have been able to reach in the wrestling industry. In professional wrestling, I mean, when you really talk about the mega stars, the mega draws, the guys that are larger than life, the guys that have been able to extend their popularity outside of just the professional wrestling industry and community and their fan base, there's only a handful of guys that you can really put in that category. There's maybe enough guys to put on that you can count on one hand. I think MJF is certainly one of the more charismatic guys, if not the most charismatic guy in professional wrestling right now. The one thing that I think he has going against him is he's crazy successful as a heel. I think ultimately what is going to define MJF's career and what will prevent him from getting to that next level or next, that mega star category that we're talking about here is just the fact that I envision him being the guy that is going to be the pessimist to the main guy. And that's not necessarily a knock on him because all of them have had it. I mean, when you look at the career of a guy like Hulk Hogan, he had that in Roddy Piper. He had that in Randy Savage. He had that in Andre the Giant. Stone Cold Steve Austin, as big as he was, he had a counterpart. He had the antagonist that he was going against in Vince McMahon, the boss, The Rock. He was extremely charismatic, and he also had a Triple H, and to a certain extent, he had Austin. And then when you talk about John Cena, he had Edge and he had Orton. And I guess even if you want to compare AJ, that in his later part of his career when he decided to come back or was working part-time or whatever the case may have been, I envision MJF being the counterpart and not so much the guy that's going to be the guy. And that's not to say he can't do it. It's just from what I've seen from him, he's going to be a very good heel for a very long time. And I don't see him playing that role of the extremely over face, so to speak, when you talk about some of these other guys that I just mentioned.
All right, so here's the thing. A lot of what you're saying makes a lot of sense, but that's the WWE way of making a megastar. There have been in WCW, in the territories, you can be a megastar as a heel. Ric Flair was a megastar as a heel, going through various territories, putting his name on the marquee, selling at whatever promotion he was in as a heel. Hulk Hogan and the NWO were megastars as heels. Stone Cold Steve Austin had to be, I guess, a heel cutting that King of the Ring promo to get him to that megastar status. The Rock, he had to turn heel and join the Nation of Domination before he became a megastar. John Cena, the Doctor of Thugonomics, was a heel before he was a megastar. So to say that because he's the heel doesn't mean he can't be the megastar, I think that is totally fine. If you need to have the heel to go with the babyface, as you're saying, he's going to be the counterpart. And I totally agree, but that's why he's going to be the household name, because he could be the counterpart to a Jon Moxley. He could be a counterpart to a Cody Rhodes, where I think that's really the big rivalry of AEW is going to be, is between MJF and Cody Rhodes. We see him with Jericho right now. How's that going to be? Is Jericho going to be the babyface, or is this going to be a face turn for MJF? You don't know if he's going to be a good enough face in professional wrestling. We kind of had a hint of him being a face with his friendship with Cody Rhodes in the first months of AEW. And I'd say he was pretty over as far as the financial and the television draw, whatever. He seems to be in line with the Moxleys and Jerichos and Codys as far as minute-to-minute ratings and viewership. He's one of the top guys there. He moves merchandise, and he's only in his early 20s. So the potential is definitely there. And I think he's a guy where, and this is what Bubba Ray was saying on that little clip that I heard on Busted Open Radio. You don't necessarily need to be the greatest wrestler, but you have to be the best on the stick. And that's what he is right now. He is the best talker in pro wrestling, and he could get a reaction out of anybody in the crowd. And that's part of what makes a megastar, being able to get a reaction from anybody, whether it's a boo or a cheer. He does that.
Yeah, he certainly is one of the best, if not the best on the stick right now. The one thing that you pointed out is they're talking about potential. Now, there's been hundreds of guys I'm sure that you can point out throughout the history of professional wrestling and say, you know what, they have the potential to be the next megastar. But unfortunately, like you said, it's not necessarily being the best wrestler that's really going to take you to that next level. Many of the guys that we're talking about here, Hogan, he was criticized for years as essentially having the same match, the beatdown, the big comeback, the big boot, and the leg drop. Austin, when he was finally really over as Stone Cold Steve Austin, that was the tail end of his career, or at least where he was limited due to injuries. So he would probably say himself that that wasn't the best wrestling version of himself. Cena, I mean, I think that Cena actually gets a bad rep. I think that he's a much better wrestler than people give him credit for. I think he gets defined by the 5 moves of doom. He's had a ton of classic matches, a ton of classic feuds, and I think he's done a really good job of earning the respect of a majority of the wrestling fan base. But the main point I want to make with this is to say that just because he has potential, he can become a megastar. I mean, sure, there's plenty of people that you could say have the potential, but to actually be that megastar, to get to that level of stardom where it's not just, okay, you're crazy over, you're pushing t-shirts with the fans of the professional wrestling industry. It's really transcending into sports, into, with Ric Flair, you mentioned, he's still especially popular within like hip hop culture. Hulk Hogan back in the 80s when he was in Rocky and he was doing movies and all of these things. The Rock is right now the biggest box office draw as far as Hollywood is concerned. I mean, that's the type of level of stardom that we're talking about here because we're talking about megastar. There's plenty of guys that fit into the category of really over and borderline megastar, but just didn't necessarily get to that level.
Who's an example of that? That could have been the megastar and just hasn't or wasn't the megastar that you're explaining here?
The most recent example of that, I would say, was that got to the point where he was almost at that point was Dan O'Brien. And I say that because the Yes movement itself was so big in professional wrestling that it even transcended out into sports. I think the San Francisco Giants were using the Yes movement. Michigan State football, if I'm correct, was using the Yes movement in their whole thing. So that transcended outside of the professional wrestling industry. Now, ultimately, that was cut short due to injury. So we never really got to see how big or how far he could have gone with that. But that to me is an example. CM Punk to me is a guy that comes to mind. He was crazy over with many people within the wrestling fan base. But to say like he is next level or megastar, I can't just sit here and say, well, because he has the potential, yeah, he's going to go out there and he's going to do it. He might, but there's a good chance that he might not.
Right. I get what you're saying there, but people say, and Eric Bischoff even said this too, we have not seen that megastar since John Cena. John Cena debuted in WWE in 2002. We're talking almost 20 years ago. And I think the main reason why we haven't gotten that next Cena in 20 years is because a lot of that time, WWE was the only dog in the pound, and they were the ones building the stars, but it was John Cena that was that megastar. And anytime there was someone that could be that megastar, WWE either didn't book them right or they got over with the niche audience, but not the mainstream audience. There was always a reason, or WWE found a way to bury them when they were getting over on their own, whatever the case may be. AEW is in their first year, just closing out their first year on AEW Dynamite on TNT. They need to build megastars to sustain their time on TNT.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, they see that with MJF because throughout the year, he stayed in the main event picture. He stayed with the top guys like Cody, like Jericho, like Moxley, and still possibly even outperformed them in times where they were on there. So those that are coming from WWE, watching AEW go, hey, this MJF guy, he's pretty damn good. This guy's got a lot of potential. And that's going to cross over. Now, the thing that makes The Rock, that makes Cena, that made Hogan megastars is their stuff that they did outside the ring, outside of professional wrestling. The Rock with his acting, Hogan with his acting, Cena, his acting, his Make-A-Wish stuff. And now he's going into hosting game shows just like Cody Rhodes is. MJF, put him on like an American Idol show and just be like a Simon Cowell And America would hate him, not just from wrestling aspects, but from just a mainstream aspect. If you could get MJF to be that guy outside of wrestling, which we already know he can be when he's flipping off young kids, you could put that there and he could be the biggest villain outside of Donald Trump in America.
No, I'm right there with you. I agree 100%. But that is, again, that's why I see him as being the top heel in the industry for a very long time to come. Do I see him as being a top face? I don't know. You pointed this out. I mean, there's only been a few guys throughout the history of professional wrestling that have been as equally as successful as a face as they have been as a heel. Again, he has all the things. He has all the intangibles. He has all the stuff to make him that ultra heel. But can he be as successful as a face? Maybe, maybe not. The one thing that a lot of people say that have worked in professional wrestling that it is much easier to be the villain than it is to be the face. To try and actually get people to cheer you is the hard thing, So
that's true. Well,
that's going to be the hard thing for him, I think.
Right, but I think today's professional wrestling, especially today's professional wrestling, I think you have to be the heel to be the megastar, because what does everybody say? In order to get over, they got to turn this guy heel. They got to turn this guy heel. That's the only way they're going to get over. We've been waiting 5 years for a guy like Roman Reigns to turn heel. He finally turns heel, and everybody loves him now. So I think MJF does not necessarily need to be a babyface to be a megastar. I mean, there are tons of anti-heroes or villains that still could be box office draws. Yep. Look at Conor McGregor. Most people pay to see him get his ass kicked as a fighter. Not necessarily, he's not a babyface, and you bring up MMA all the time. So why can't MJF be that guy where everyone just wants to pay to see him get hit?
I would disagree. I don't think I think maybe right now Conor McGregor is, but when Conor McGregor was fighting at his peak in the UFC, he was definitely one of the most beloved fighters then and maybe of all time. People paid to see him win. A very small percentage probably paid to see him lose. But going back to your point here, I mean, the one thing that truly dictates how over or how famous a person is going to be is the fans. The connection that you have with the fans. And a lot of times, even with stuff like this, it comes from out of nowhere. It's unexpected. It's a cultural phenomenon type thing. Hogan was crazy over because he was pure Americana during a time we were just coming out of the Gulf War or during the Gulf War. So everybody gravitated towards that. Stone Cold Steve Austin, that was an easy thing to like and get behind because it was anti-corporation. It was anti your boss. Things like that, the connection you have with the fans. If you can make that connection, you can certainly get over. MJF is very good at getting under the skin of fans, but I actually think that there is an individual in AEW that can get to that next level or have that connection with the fans. And you see that in the numbers this past week. The match that Darby Allin had with Ricky Starks. To me, Darby Allin is a guy that is extremely unique, and I think that he can get over in a large way and connect with that younger fan base. So much to the point where if you put him alongside an MJF where, all the fans are behind Darby and MJF goes out there and cuts these promos and just kind of torches him for who he is and because he's different, to me, that's what makes money. MJF is perfect for that role. Can he be a megastar? Sure, he can. But I think the money's in Darby Allin.
Interesting. Very interesting. And obviously, Darby would definitely break the mold of superstars in professional wrestling because obviously, he's not the body type. He's not the character that we usually see out of megastars. Maybe you're onto something. I'll say that. Maybe you're onto something with Darby, but he's got to have MJF to make it to that status, I think. He's got to have that nemesis.
Yes.
I can't put him anywhere else without MJF. And maybe in today's wrestling, to make a superstar, maybe it's not the babyface needing the villain. It's the villain that needs the babyface to become the megastar. And we talk about, put someone with MJF and the story's going to go. So as long as whoever it is facing MJF, you're making money. Whereas, whoever's facing John Cena, you're making money. Whoever's going to face The Rock, you're making money. Whoever's facing Austin, you're making money. Whoever you're facing Hogan, you're making, you get my point here. So that's what I'm saying. If you're that guy where no matter who you are facing, you're making money, You're the megastar. That's what I'm saying. And MJF right now has pulled it off in the first year of AEW, where he's with Moxley, he's with Jericho, he's with Cody, and he's excelled at all times. And if you put him even in a small feud with Jungle Boy, it still worked. So
yeah, he is great, and he has all the potential to get there.
He does.
The only thing that's holding me back from saying he will be that megastar is just the fact that it's hard to predict because there's so many guys that could have done it and had the potential to do it and didn't get to that point. And it's only happened a handful of times where you've gotten guys to that next level superstardom. So that's where I stand. And I hope he proves me wrong because I want him to be successful because he is great.
Yeah, he definitely is. And I'm sure the comment section is going to go nuts with this debate. And it's not the only debate we recently did. We debated whether or not Tessa Blanchard will be in AEW or WWE. You can check out that video right now by clicking the thumbnail on the screen. And don't forget to subscribe, hit that bell for notifications to join the conversation. And we'll see you on the next episode of the Squared Circle Psychobabble.